She wore a deep red dress with her hair piled high, ringlets cascading down her neck. 4 days later, her body was found stuffed in a suitcase, dumped like garbage behind her own house. But the most chilling part? The man who killed her was caught on CCTV dragging that suitcase across his backyard. Her husband, the man she'd married just hours before he strangled her to death. Welcome back to Dark True Crime. Before we dive into one of the most heartbreaking wedding night murders you'll ever hear, hit that subscribe button right now. Because Dawn Walker told her daughter she had a bad feeling about marrying Thomas Nutt. She even asked her neighbor if she should get the hell out and run. But she walked down that aisle anyway, and it cost her everything. October 27th, 2021. Lightcliffe, West Yorkshire, England. It should have been one of the happiest days of Dawn Walker's life. At 52 years old, she was getting married to Thomas Nutt at a register office ceremony. Dawn arrived at the wedding reception at the Prince Albert pub wearing that stunning deep red dress, her hair styled beautifully, smiling and happy. Her 3 daughters were there. Friends and neighbors came to celebrate. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But those closest to Dawn knew something was terribly wrong. In the week leading up to the wedding, Dawn had confided in her daughter, Kira Lee, that she had a bad feeling about it. Dawn had even asked a neighbor if she should get the hell out and run. That neighbor would later testify at Bradford Crown Court, wishing desperately that she'd told Dawn, yes, run as fast as you can. Because Dawn Walker knew exactly who she was marrying. She'd been with Thomas Nutt for 3 years, and those 3 years had been filled with violence, control, and terror. Nutt was a bully who used his size and strength to dominate the diminutive 52-year-old grandmother. He had a history of violence not just with Dawn, but with previous partners as well. In 2020, a neighbor saw Dawn with what she described as a massive black eye, with her lips and cheeks cut and heavily swollen. Another neighbor heard screaming coming from the house that was so intense, he'd never heard such screaming coming from a woman in his life. When he intervened, Dawn told him Nutt was going to kill her, and Dawn had tried to escape before. After one particularly brutal assault in August 2020, where Nutt beat her so savagely that neighbors called police, he was arrested and sent to prison. Dawn even confided in her daughter that during their relationship, Nutt had raped her. She had every reason to leave, every reason to run. But domestic violence doesn't work that way, does it? If you've ever known someone trapped in an abusive relationship or been there yourself, drop a comment below. Because people always ask, why didn't she just leave? But leaving is complicated, dangerous, and often the most lethal time for victims. After Nutt was released from prison for that 2020 assault, Dawn took him back. The relationship was tumultuous, toxic, and violent. One minute they were loved up as neighbors described it, and the next they'd be arguing intensely. Neighbors heard Dawn calling out, "Tomo, get off me!" through the walls. Dawn had even reached out to Nutt's ex-partner, the mother of his children, trying to understand what she was dealing with. That woman told Dawn she had a restraining order against Nutt because he'd been violent with her too. Dawn confessed to her that Nutt scared the hell out of her and that a trusted friend had photographs of Dawn's injuries. The last message exchange between Dawn and Nutt's ex was in October 2020, a full year before the wedding. When asked if Nutt was back with her, Dawn replied, "Not yet." But eventually, he wore her down. He manipulated her, isolated her from family, made her feel like she had nowhere else to go. And somehow, despite all the violence and terror, Dawn agreed to marry him. On their wedding day, after the reception at the Prince Albert pub, Dawn and Thomas Nutt took a taxi back to their home on Shirley Grove in Lightcliffe. The taxi driver dropped them off, and Dawn Walker walked into her house for the last time. Within hours, Thomas Nutt would strangle her to death. Prosecutors believe Nutt killed Dawn on their wedding night itself, October 27th, 2021. He strangled her with such force that she died in the home they shared, the place where she should have felt safest. And then, rather than call for help or show any remorse, Thomas Nutt did something that proves just how calculated and cruel he truly was. He left Dawn's body in a cupboard, just stuffed her in there like an old coat and went about his business. Because Thomas Nutt had plans. He'd booked a caravan honeymoon to Skegness, a seaside town on the east coast of England. And he wasn't about to let his wife's murder ruin his vacation. So Nutt hooked up his caravan and drove to Skegness, leaving Dawn's body decomposing in a cupboard back home. He spent several nights alone in a lay-by, living his best life while his wife lay dead. Neighbors who saw him leave with the caravan assumed Dawn was with him, that the newlyweds were off enjoying their honeymoon. But Dawn wasn't enjoying anything. She was dead, murdered by the man she'd just married, hidden away while he pretended everything was fine. When Nutt returned from Skegness, he had to deal with the problem of Dawn's body. He couldn't leave her in the cupboard forever. People would start asking questions. Her daughters would want to see her. So Nutt came up with a plan that was as cruel as it was calculated. He took Dawn's body out of the cupboard. And here's where it gets truly horrific. Because Dawn was 52 years old and just over 5 feet tall, rigor mortis had set in and her body wouldn't fit easily into a suitcase. So Thomas Nutt broke his wife's bones. He twisted her legs, bent them at the knees, forced her body into unnatural positions until he could stuff her into a suitcase. Dr. Kirsten Hope, the Home Office-approved forensic pathologist who performed Dawn's postmortem, testified at trial that when she first saw Dawn's body, it was still in the suitcase with her legs twisted and bent at the knees. The level of force required to do that to a human body, the complete lack of respect for the woman he'd claimed to love, it's almost incomprehensible. Once Nutt had forced Dawn's broken body into the suitcase, he wheeled it through his house and out into the backyard. And this is where his arrogance became his downfall. Because Thomas Nutt apparently forgot about the CCTV cameras that covered his property and the surrounding area. Security footage captured the entire thing. Nutt dragging the suitcase across his backyard, through the garden, across a field, and then lifting it over a fence into undergrowth behind the house. The footage is chilling. You can see him struggling with the weight, maneuvering the case, and then just tossing it away like garbage. But Nutt wasn't done with his sick charade, because now he had to explain where Dawn was. So he started pretending she'd gone missing. On October 31st, Halloween, 4 days after the wedding, Thomas Nutt called the police to report that his new bride had disappeared. He told them Dawn had left the house that morning and hadn't come back. He seemed concerned, worried, playing the role of distraught husband whose wife had mysteriously vanished. Nutt even took Dawn's youngest daughter, Kira Lee, on a bogus search for her mother. He drove around the area with her, pointing out places they should look, suggesting where Dawn might have gone. The whole time, he knew exactly where Dawn was. He'd put her there himself. The prosecution would later call this a ghastly charade. Imagine being Kira Lee, desperate to find your mother, trusting your new stepfather to help search, not knowing he'd murdered her on their wedding night and dumped her body in a suitcase behind the house. And here's something that still makes investigators' skin crawl. While Dawn's body was decomposing in that suitcase, while her family was desperately searching for her, Thomas Nutt put up Halloween decorations in the house. He hung up fake spiders and jack-o'-lanterns, decorating for a holiday like nothing was wrong. Neighbors became suspicious. Something didn't add up. Dawn wouldn't just disappear without telling her daughters. And the way Nutt was acting, the things he was saying, it all felt wrong. One neighbor, a woman who'd seen Dawn with that massive black eye in 2020, decided to search the area behind the houses herself. On October 31st, just 4 days after the wedding, that neighbor found a suitcase in the undergrowth. At first, she probably thought it was just discarded luggage. But when she looked closer, when she saw what was inside, the horrifying truth became clear. Dawn Walker's body, stuffed in a suitcase, hidden in bushes behind her own home, dumped there by the man who'd promised to love and cherish her till death do them part. Police were called immediately. Thomas Nutt was brought in for questioning. And that's when his story started falling apart. Make sure you're subscribed to Dark True Crime, because what Thomas Nutt told police, and what the prosecution proved in court, revealed a monster who thought he could literally get away with murder. Nutt initially claimed that he and Dawn had both gone to Skegness for their honeymoon. According to his story, they'd had a lovely 2-day trip in the caravan, staying in a lay-by. Everything had been fine until they got home, when Dawn suddenly told him she wanted a divorce. Nutt told officers, "We came back, and she has got bipolar and is depressed," said she wanted to get divorced. "She put me in jail before, said I had tried raping and assaulting her, said she was going to do it again. She started screaming, and I have hit her in the face and put my arm round her neck." So Nutt's defense was basically, Dawn started it. She threatened him. She was going to falsely accuse him again. He was just trying to restrain her during an argument, and he accidentally killed her. He didn't mean to. It was manslaughter, not murder. The prosecution tore this story to shreds because the evidence showed Dawn never went to Skegness. Nutt went alone. He killed Dawn on their wedding night, hid her body, went on their honeymoon by himself, came back, broke her bones to stuff her in a suitcase, and dumped her like trash. Nutt also told a police officer before his arrest that Dawn was a secret drinker. He was already trying to smear her character, make her seem unstable, plant seeds that maybe she'd done something to herself or provoked her own death. And in a moment of incredible audacity, Nutt joked with a neighbor who'd accompanied him to search a cemetery for Dawn. He said he was glad the neighbor had come with him, because otherwise, people would think he had murdered her. That's the mind of a killer, making jokes about murdering your wife while her body lies in a suitcase behind your house. The trial began at Bradford Crown Court in August 2022. Prosecutor Alastair MacDonald QC told the jury that while wedding days are supposed to be the happiest times of people's lives, that wasn't the case for Dawn Walker. Her body was found stuffed into a suitcase and dumped into some undergrowth in a field towards the back of this defendant's house 4 days after she was married. Thomas Nutt pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He admitted he'd killed Dawn, but claimed he never intended to cause her serious harm. It was an accident during an argument, he said. She'd provoked him. She'd threatened him. He was just defending himself. But the prosecution wasn't having it. They charged him with murder, arguing this was a deliberate killing by a violent bully who'd finally lost complete control over the woman he'd been abusing for years. The evidence presented at trial painted a picture of a man who'd been violent, controlling, and abusive throughout his entire adult life. Thomas Nutt had been convicted of GBH when he was just 17 years old. He'd served long prison sentences for robberies in the 1990s. He had a documented history of violence against previous partners, including the mother of his children, who'd needed a restraining order to protect herself from him. And with Dawn, the pattern had continued. Neighbors testified about seeing her with horrific injuries: the massive black eye, the swollen cut face, hearing her scream, "Tomo, get off me," through the walls. One neighbor described how in August 2020, just over a year before the wedding, he'd intervened during an assault where Dawn told him Nutt was going to kill her. Judge Jonathan Rose, presiding over the case, heard testimony from over 100 witnesses during the 2.5-week trial. The CCTV footage of Nutt dragging the suitcase was shown to the jury. Phone records proved Nutt had sent false text messages from Dawn's phone pretending to be her. Forensic evidence showed Dawn had been strangled to death, and her body had been broken to fit in that suitcase. Dawn's daughter, Kira Lee, gave devastating testimony. She told the court about that final week before the wedding when her mother confessed she had a bad feeling about marrying Nutt. She described how the relationship had moved very, very quick and spiraled from the beginning. Kira Lee also testified about October 31st, when Nutt took her around looking for her mother. She had no idea she was with her mother's killer, that Dawn's body was already in that suitcase behind the house. The betrayal, the cruelty of that ghastly charade, as prosecutors called it, is almost unbearable to contemplate. After hearing all the evidence, prosecutor Alastair MacDonald QC stood before the jury during closing arguments and said, "Thomas Nutt is a seasoned, practiced liar, and it is the prosecution's case you cannot believe a word he has said." The jury agreed. After deliberating, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder. There were cheers from the public gallery as the verdict was read. Dawn's family broke down in tears. Justice was finally being served for the grandmother who'd been murdered on what should have been the happiest night of her life. On August 19th, 2022, Thomas Nutt was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 21 years before he'd be eligible for parole. Judge Jonathan Rose told Nutt he was satisfied the murder had taken place on the wedding night itself, despite Nutt's claims it happened days later. Dawn Walker died because you are a bully, used to getting your own way with women, used to controlling and manipulating women, and used to using your considerable size advantage to inflict violence on women if you considered it necessary to do so, Judge Rose said. The judge continued, "You then desecrated her body, hiding it in a cupboard while you enjoyed a short holiday before forcing her body into a suitcase, deceiving her family and friends when she went missing. Your behavior in going out with Kira and others ostensibly to look for Dawn was persistent, misleading, and cruel. You treated her body with no respect whatsoever." Judge Rose also noted that he was not inclined to accept Nutt was genuinely remorseful. Throughout the trial, Nutt had continued to blame Dawn, casting aspersions on her character, suggesting her actions had forced him to use violence. That pattern of victim blaming, from his first police interview to his final court testimony, proved he felt no real remorse for what he'd done. The victim impact statements delivered in court were heartbreaking. Dawn's sister Lisa faced Nutt and told him, "If locking you up stops you killing someone else and hurting another family, that will give us peace." Lisa described how Nutt had taken every single bit of dignity Dawn deserved by treating the woman he said he loved by dumping her like rubbish. She revealed the family had to hold 2 funerals for Dawn because they were missing her brain for the first service, presumably due to the forensic examination. He has taken a mother from her 3 daughters. They were her hope, her life, her strength, Lisa said, her voice breaking. "I go to bed thinking how she was treated in the days, weeks, and months leading to her death." Kira Lee's statement was equally powerful. She described her mother as the most beautiful person and unapologetically her. When she got the call about her mother's death, Kira Lee said she lost a part of herself that day. "This man took the most beautiful soul. He demanded to be treated and acted as a child. What he did to my mom is beyond cruel. He has broken this family, but we have the strength to get the justice she deserves," Kira Lee told the court. Not only did he beat and abuse her, he disrespected her in so many ways, which ended in him taking her life. If you're watching this and you've lost someone to domestic violence, or you know someone currently in an abusive relationship, drop a comment below. Because Dawn Walker's story is a reminder that abuse escalates, that leaving is the most dangerous time, and that we all need to do better at protecting victims. After sentencing, Emma Covington of the Crown Prosecution Service said, "What should have been the happiest time of Dawn's life was instead marked by absolute tragedy when she met her death at the hands of the man she had just married." Detective Inspector Amanda Wimbles of the West Yorkshire Police Homicide and Major Inquiry Team spoke about Dawn's family, saying, "They lost Dawn in such tragic circumstances shortly after her wedding, and the whole family miss her dearly. They have had to deal with the cruel and callous manner in which Thomas Nutt disposed of her body, which is something that will always be with them." In October 2022, just months after his conviction, Thomas Nutt lodged an appeal against his murder conviction. His legal team argued, well, they argued something. The specifics of the appeal grounds weren't made public, but it hardly matters. The evidence against Nutt was overwhelming. The CCTV footage alone was damning. Add in the forensic evidence, the witness testimony, his own contradictory statements, and there's simply no basis for overturning the conviction. While serving his sentence at HMP Leeds, Nutt was reportedly attacked by other inmates. Prison justice, some might call it. Fellow prisoners don't tend to look kindly on men who murder women, especially on their wedding night. Dawn Walker's case sparked important conversations about domestic violence in the UK. The Independent Domestic Abuser Services in Yorkshire spoke out after the verdict, describing red flags that can indicate a relationship may be abusive. A spokesperson told media outlets that these warning signs look different for everyone and can be very difficult to recognize while you're in the relationship. Abusive relationships can start full of promise and hope for the future. The relationship may move very quickly, which can be quite confusing and disorientating. They may have a history of domestic abuse or violence. If a previous partner has been hurt or harmed, then this could be a warning sign. They may seek commitment quickly and put you under pressure to do things that you don't feel comfortable with. That perfectly describes Dawn's relationship with Thomas Nutt. It moved very, very quick, as Kira Lee testified. Nutt had a documented history of violence with previous partners. He pushed for commitment, for marriage, even though Dawn had expressed doubts and fears. And that moment when Dawn asked her neighbor if she should get the hell out and run, that was Dawn's instinct screaming at her that she was in danger. But the pressure, the manipulation, the isolation from family that Nutt had carefully orchestrated over 3 years, it all kept her trapped. Dawn Walker was described by neighbors as chirpy and energetic before she met Nutt. She was a devoted mother to her 3 daughters, a loving grandmother, someone who lit up rooms with her presence. Photos from happier times show a woman with a beautiful smile, full of life. But by the time of her wedding, that light had dimmed. The red dress and styled hair couldn't hide the fear she'd confided to her daughter. The celebration at the Prince Albert pub couldn't erase the bad feeling that something terrible was going to happen. And Dawn was right. Something terrible did happen. Within hours of saying "I do," she was strangled to death by the man she just married. Her body was hidden in a cupboard, then broken and stuffed into a suitcase, then dumped behind her own house while her killer pretended to search for her. Thomas Nutt will spend at least 21 years in prison, but realistically, given his age and the nature of his crime, he'll likely die behind bars. The parole board would have to determine he's no longer a danger to women before he could ever be released. And given his complete lack of remorse and history of violence, that seems unlikely. But even if Nutt serves every day of his minimum sentence and dies in prison, it doesn't bring Dawn back. Her 3 daughters will never hear her voice again. Her grandchildren will grow up without their Nana. The family has been shattered in ways that can never fully heal. The most tragic aspect of Dawn Walker's murder is that it was preventable. Nutt had been arrested and imprisoned for assaulting Dawn in 2020. She had photographs of her injuries. Neighbors had witnessed his violence. His ex-partner had warned Dawn about him, even told her about the restraining order. All the warning signs were there. All the red flags were waving. But the system failed to protect Dawn. When Nutt was released from prison after that 2020 assault, there was no monitoring, no requirement to stay away from Dawn, no intervention to help her escape safely. And Dawn, like so many domestic violence victims, went back to her abuser. Because leaving is complicated. Because she probably loved him, or at least loved the person he pretended to be when he wasn't being violent. Because she may have felt she had nowhere else to go. Because abusers are masters at manipulation, at making victims feel like they deserve the abuse, or that things will change. Make sure you're subscribed to Dark True Crime, because next time we're covering another case where a monster hid in plain sight, where the warning signs were ignored, and where a family is left picking up the pieces after an unthinkable tragedy. Until then, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. In the U.S., call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. In the UK, contact the National Domestic Abuse Helpline at 0808 2000 247. Don't wait for things to get better. Don't think you can fix an abuser. And if you have a bad feeling about someone like Dawn did, trust that instinct. Run. Dawn Walker told her daughter she had a bad feeling about marrying Thomas Nutt. She asked her neighbor if she should run. Her instincts were screaming at her that she was in danger. But she walked down that aisle anyway, and hours later, she was dead. Don't let that be your story. Don't let that be someone you love's story. Speak up. Reach out. Leave before it's too late. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, trust your gut, and remember that the deadliest person in your life is often the one who claims to love you most. I'll see you in the next video.